Today is all about old meets new. I'll show you the most important elements of a good composite, and then we'll use some new methods of tackling those edits, as well as the tried and true editing techniques that we've been using for years. Okay, let's start by creating a new file. I've chosen 16 by 9. First, I'll place the space background, resize to fit, and now the boy. Let's start by removing him from the background. To do this, choose any selection tool, then select Cloud from the drop-down here. It does a little bit better job. And hit Select Subject. Control J to put him on a new layer, and then I can get rid of the original layer. Whenever you're working with composites, you'll want to make sure that you always right-click and convert your subject to a smart object before resizing. If you don't, you may find that your subject becomes pixelated. There are certain things that you just have to get right when you're working with composites, and one of the most important things is perspective. I need to make sure that the perspective of this little boy matches that of the scene. So if I go back to the original picture, I can kind of tell just by looking at the picture that it was taken from maybe about waist height. So I'm just going to put a little line there to indicate that that's where the horizon line would be for him. Now the horizon line in our background, if I just move him over a little bit, we can see that it's about where the moon is coming up over in the back. So I'm going to place that horizon line, the one from our background, close to where it was in his original photo, over his waist. Now what I'll do is grab the center point in my bounding box when I go to resize him, and I'm going to place that right over the horizon, and you'll see that now I can resize him to any size I want, and it's always going to be in perspective off to that vanishing point, or I can make him large and closer to the camera. Now his perspective will perfectly match that of the scene. I would argue that the most useful of Photoshop's AI tools has been the generative fill feature. This is what I'm going to use to change this little boy out of his early 1900s outfit into a spacesuit. So all I'm doing is I have my lasso tool and I'm just making a very general selection around his body, and then I'm going to come up here to the contextual taskbar, click on generative fill, and then I'll type in spacesuit just to help it out. Click generate. And Photoshop is about to give us 3 different options of spacesuits for this little boy to wear. Now, I know you may or may not like AI, but I think it's so great to be able to combine some of the old and some of the new to get the results you're looking for. And as you're about to see in just a second, Photoshop doesn't always get it right on the first try. So yeah, I got 3 different options. This first one was terrible, and then I got a couple others. Ultimately, I ended up hitting generate again, which you can do as many times as you want, and got 3 more options. By the way, if you want to see pictures of these options, go down to here where it says properties and scroll down, you'll see the pictures. So I chose this one. Now keep in mind the spacesuit itself is not a transparent selection, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to click on the mask and hit the backslash button, and you can see everything in red is black on the mask. Everything that is not red is white on the mask, so that's part of the selection. So that little part there is the entire selection of the spacesuit. It's not just the suit itself, it's that little bit of surrounding area as well. And now because of that, we've got little areas to clean up. So I'm just going to use this relatively new remove tool. And if it won't let you, you probably need to right click and rasterize your layer if it was turned into a smart object previously. So with the remove tool, you can literally just paint over whatever it is that you want to remove. And Photoshop does a really nice job of figuring it out and just removing it from the scene. So I'm just going to go through and remove all the little areas that I don't want. It does a really nice job of filling in blanks as well, so I can clean up his neck area. Now I'm going to group these layers and name it boy. I will convert that to a smart object. So now I've got just the boy on this layer, but watch. When I go to resize him, this shows you exactly what I meant about that mask and the selection around him. So in order to get rid of that, I'm going to hide my background layer for a second and just take a selection of the boy himself. So again, select subject and then Control J to put him on his own layer. Now I can get rid of that original layer that had the masking around him. And once again, I'll just convert him to a smart object. So now I've got my boy on one layer and my background on another. He no longer has that funny mask around him. I've decided that his head looks too big for his body with this new spacesuit, so that's really easy to fix. All you have to do is click on the layer with the boy, and I'm just going to select his head and go to Select, Modify, and Expand. So I'm just going to expand the area around the selection a bit and take out this little part that got selected accidentally. Okay, now I'm going to hit Control T and just resize his head until it looks more in proportion to his body. Control D to deselect. I'm going to do a similar adjustment to his left arm, which doesn't quite match up with the right. It's much smaller. So once again, I'm just going to take a selection of the arm. I'm not going to worry so much about the hands. We will change those because they don't look very natural. But selecting the arm, and then again, you always want to expand your selection a little bit beyond with these types of edits because that will ensure that you got the entire arm, and it also minimizes the risk of getting any haloing around. So again, I'm just doing a Control T, holding down my Shift key and making any adjustments to make it a little bit wider to match that right arm. Now I'm going to click inside the bounding box, right click and choose Warp, and now I can pull out these little points and just make micro adjustments wherever I think it's necessary. And again, Control D to deselect. Okay, let's take care of those gloves now. I'm going to select each one of them. Make sure that that second box is checked to add to your selection so you can select two different things. And again, I'm going to use generative fill and I'll type in kind of what I want to help it out. You don't necessarily have to type anything in. And this is just to show you it's not always going to be perfect. Sometimes you do have to hit generate again to get what you want. Ultimately, I came up with this pair of gloves. I'm going to need to make some adjustments, but I'm pretty happy with this for now. And we're going to use the same method for taking off his hat. You know the drill by now. We're going to use generative fill. For those of you who don't like generative fill or are concerned about AI, I do share some of your concerns, but I do think it's important that you know what options are out there and then you can use them as you see fit. And again, by hitting the backslash key on the mask, you can see exactly where the selection is for both his hat and the gloves on each of those layers. Now that I've brought him into this century, I'm going to go ahead and clean up my layers. Control-Alt-Shift-E merges all of the layers below into one. I'm going to make one selection of this little boy, and that way I can put him again on his own layer. Now I just have the original background on one layer, the boy in his new spacesuit on another layer, and I can just go ahead and get rid of all of these generative fill layers that I don't need anymore. Another thing you want to make sure you get right when working with composites is color correction. Usually your subject is not going to perfectly match your digital background in color, so you'll want to make some adjustments. I can see here that my background has a little bit of a green or yellow tinge, so I'm going to use the color balance layer with a clipping mask to increase the yellows and greens just a bit in the midtones of my subject. Now to make sure that I'm on track, I'm going to use the color picker, so click on the background layer and then with the color picker, I'm going to select the colors of the moon because I want the moon and his spacesuit to be roughly in the same color range. And yes, it looks like I'm on track. The moon is in the yellow and green range. So I'm just going to paint these adjustments onto his suit just to bring out a little bit of that yellow and green color cast from the moon. I'm also going to turn the flow down just a bit on my brush. When you do that, you can build the color up gradually. The more you brush, the deeper the color will become. Now I'm going to create another color balance layer, and this time I'll grab the colors from the ground that would also reflect onto his spacesuit. So the ground looks to me pretty obviously that it's some red tones, but just to make sure, again, I'm going to click on the background and take a sample with the color picker and just double check. Yeah, it's like a reddish orange. So same thing, increase the reds. And I'm doing this with a clipping mask to make sure only the boy is affected. And if you're not sure how to do that, I just right clicked on the color balance layer and selected create clipping mask. Okay, now that I've adjusted the reds, I'm going to change my mask to black and then just paint those on. Primarily, I'll be focusing on his legs and the bottom part of his body. You have to think about how the light is going to reflect the colors of the environment onto the things in the environment. Now I'm going to do the exact same process, only this time I'm going to take a sample from the shadows because I want to adjust his shadows to match. And I can see it's like a pinkish hue in the shadows if I were to saturate using this slider. So that's what I'm going to choose. I'm going to create a third color balance layer. And this time I'm going to select shadows. And so since the shadows were more of a pinkish hue, and don't forget that clipping mask, I'm going to increase the reds and the blues. It was kind of a pinkish purple. So red and blue makes purple. And then once again, I'm going to, on a black mask, paint that color. And this time it's only going to go into the shadows since that's what I selected. There's a before and after. And then I can adjust the opacity as needed. And now on to the next super important element in any composite, and that is lighting. It's very important that you make the lighting on your subject match that of the background. So in this background, it's pretty obvious that the majority of the lighting is going to be coming from the moon. There might be areas where light is bouncing off of other objects, but I want to create some rim lighting around him to reflect that the light would be coming from behind him. To do that, I'm going to use a curves adjustment layer and bring down all of the brightest highlights. So from the very top of the curves adjustment, just bring those down, make sure I get that clipping mask in there. Now I've made his entire body darker, but I want the back of his body to be lit by the moon. So I'm going to, with a black brush, a soft black brush, just brush that effect off of the back part of his body. And with this soft brush, I can also allow the light to sort of bleed around the sides and edges of his body like it would in real life. So we'll just tap around his body. I'm going to also get some areas that are a little closer to the front of his body to make it look a little more natural. I'll even kind of brush the effect off of his eyes and his face just a little bit to bring out those features as well. You just kind of have to experiment with what looks right in your image. I'm also adjusting my flow, my opacity on the brush, all of those things. Right here on his face, you can tell that in the original photo, he was lit from camera right. I want to keep that light on his face. So in order for that to make sense, I would need some light coming from camera right in the background as well. So I'm going to create the illusion of a little bit of light coming from that area. Now you may think that that wouldn't make any sense because if you look at this lady's face, she's not lit from the right. But I'm going to give it a try anyway, and I think we'll find out that with the way this is going to look, it's not really going to matter. So to create this artificial light, I'm just going to sample again the color from the moon because I want all of the light colors to be relatively the same. And then click on the gradient tool. I'm going to select foreground to transparent, and then just simply click and drag where I want the light to be coming from. From here, I can adjust either opacity, or in this case, I'm going to adjust the fill. And it creates enough of a matte finish that you really don't even get the sense that it doesn't make sense for this woman's face in the back. It just kind of fades into the background. At this point, I'm just going to select and lower the opacity on all of my color changing layers because I decided that they're just too strong. Okay, now I think it's time to fix those gloves a little bit. The glove on the left is not quite looking right. His right hand glove looks pretty good though. So I really just want to copy that, but you know, when you try to use your clone tool, it needs to be flipped the other way and it just doesn't work. So I'm going to show you how to actually flip his right hand horizontally. So what you would do is with the clone stamp tool selected, click here to open the clone source panel. Then click here on the W to flip horizontal. Then what you can do is use your clone stamp tool the same way you always do. Hit Alt and then select the areas you want to clone. Then I'm going to come over to his left hand and clone the right glove. So it's following the pattern of the right glove and it's basically painting that right glove over onto the left hand, but it's flipping it horizontally. So they'll look identical, just flipped horizontally like they would be in real life. I'm going to use the same thing to fix this little spot on his arm. I'm just using the clone stamp tool flipped horizontally and just copying everything from his left arm over to the right. So the time has come. I promised you I was going to show you how to automate the changing of the color to match the background and the lighting in pretty much just one step, almost one click. It's just going to take you a few seconds. So here we go. I'm going to delete all of our previous layers and all that work, and we're back to just the boy and the background. So let's do Control J to duplicate the boy layer, turn that layer off. Then I'm going to select the boy and the background layer, which I also accidentally named boy. Then go up to Edit and choose Auto Blend Layers. Make sure Stack Images is selected and click OK. Now Photoshop will begin to work its magic, and when this pops up, just hit OK. So Photoshop has automatically blended the colors and the lights in the image to make it look very natural. Now, obviously, we have a problem. It's way too strong. But that's why we made the copy of the boy in the beginning. I'm going to reveal that layer now, and then I'm just going to keep lowering the opacity until just enough of the layer below with the lighting and color adjustments is showing through. So I want it to be relatively subtle, but still enough that it's going to blend perfectly. And here's a before and after to show you what a good job that does to add that layer and just continue to lower the opacity. So as you can see, Auto Blend Layers is a really great option for doing these composite edits very quickly. It works better in some situations than others, but I definitely would recommend trying it. I'm going to show you one last thing that you can do just kind of to tie it all together even a little bit better. You can go up to these adjustment filters in Photoshop and just kind of scroll through and apply any sort of filter that you like. I think this one looked pretty good on here, so I applied it just to tie in the colors and the lighting and just the whole scene even more. So that's it. You can come back and do any crops or further edits that you want to do, but hopefully this was helpful. I know it was very quick and not super in depth, but I just wanted to give you some really good, useful ideas that you can use in lots of different types of situations and explain kind of the main things that you really need to focus on. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.